Hello YouTubers. I wanted to make a follow-up video because about a week after I started driving my car, after I cleaned the throttle body, I noticed that I was having the stalling symptoms again, and the RPMs were dropping below 500 RPMs. So if you could see in here, this is the throttle body connection for the electronic throttle body, and all the newer Hondas seem to have gone to this. And the previous owner broke the wires off this when he was changing the starter, so I spliced these back together, and I realized that after I did this, the splice came loose from either vibration or heat in the engine bay, so I cut them off and I reconnected them with these butt connectors. So basically from Harbor Freight you get these waterproof connections, and you crimp it right here after you strip some of the water, and you take basically both ends of the connection and you crimp them back together. So I guess something to note would be when you're crimping them, this is the best crimp tool I have at the moment, which is not very great, but it has crimps for insulated wire from 14 to 22 gauge, so that's what I used. And you kind of really have to crush it as hard as you can to get a decent crimp with this. But I found that if you tug on these once you have it connected, and if there's any little like wiggle back and forth, that's not good. It's going to come loose over time. So you want to make sure when you pull on this that there's no play at all and that it's a solid crimp. And I found that if you do crimp it once and you kind of have a little bit of wiggle, you can crimp it again as long as you don't. So I try and crimp either at this end, and then if that's not tight enough, I'll move closer to the center and crimp it again, and it seemed to make it decent enough. So, and then once you're done with this, you take a torch or a heat source and you can melt these ends, and it's basically like heat shrink, and it'll wrap around the wire and it makes it more secure. And these are the wire strippers I used. You can also get these from Harbor Freight, and the wires for this connection are 18 gauge, and I believe there's two that are almost 16 gauge. I still use the 18 gauge to strip them. So this is what the connector looks like off a car. I got this from a junkyard. So the previous owner ripped these out of the pins. So this is the one that's on my car is actually another one from a junkyard. So basically, if you're having any stalling issues, make sure all these wires are intact, because if any of them starts to break loose, it'll cause those symptoms. And I also put some dielectric grease on all these 6 pins to make the connection better. And you'll see if you cut back the wire loom that was previously on here, that you'll have 6 wires. One is red with black stripe, and then you'll have 2 blue and green wires that don't have stripes. But the 2 that are in the inner, close to the red, you'll notice they're thinner gauge wire. They're the same gauge as the red ones. So those ones end up going to the centers. These 2 are the thinner ones, and the 2 on the outside here are thicker. So if you ever have to splice it together, just make sure you get the 2 thicker ones spliced correctly. And you'll notice that one of the green and blues are in their own sleeve if you cut this back, so that also helps to not mix them up. So just wanted to show you guys that. And then to pull this connection off, you just pinch this like that and it lifts up and you pull it off. It is really tight. recommend taking the breather tube off to get in and do all that wiring, because it's a pain to get under there. And you'll see that there's like a plastic retainer that this wiring harness goes into. I also put new wire loom on after I was done with it. I used the 1/4 inch, but I would think that 3/8 or 1/2 inch would be easier to get across the butt connections, so that's that. Hope this helps somebody.